Everybody to LinuxAcademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course, we continue our preparation for the Linux Professional Institute Certification, Level 2, Exam 1. We are still in Topic 200 Capacity Planning. However, we have moved on to 200.2, Predict Future Resource Needs. And we're going to be talking about gathering system usage statistics using collectd. Now, a couple of things about this particular section. You'll notice that it's significantly shorter than the previous 200.1, and that's because of the weighting. The weighting system is an indicator about where we should spend our time in preparing. And in fact, in 200.2, the only specific tool mentioned to be more than just tacitly familiar with is collectd in order to collect system and usage statistics for our system for predicting our future resource needs. And then it vaguely talks about some of the tools that we should be aware of. So we're going to spend the next 2 or 3 videos looking at collectd, setting it up and getting familiar with what its configuration looks like. And then we'll spend one video talking about those other additional tools that we need to be aware of. And again, remember that this is a very lowly weighted section in the LPIC 2 exam, so you should only expect a couple of questions on it, if that. So talking about collectd. Well, collectd, it's responsible for gathering system statistics. And it makes use of software called plugins, and those plugins drive the kind of statistics that it collects. And the way we're going to take a look at it is we're going to collect those statistics in RRD format using a particular format that we can then install a front-end GUI to look at, because what collectd does not do is it is not set up to graphically or even from a browser or a text-based perspective to look at the statistics that it gathers. So we're going to do 2 things. We're going to set up collectd, and then we're going to set up a simple mechanism with a website to take a look at the statistics that it can gather. We'll verify that our site works, and then I'm going to show you one of the other lab servers that I've already set up that's been running and has been running a job for some time so that it shows what those statistics look like when we set up collectd. So we're going to use collectd as part of the key knowledge areas to monitor IT infrastructure, predict capacity breakpoint, observe growth rate change of capacity usage, and graph the trend of capacity usage. And then again, finally, we're going to discuss an awareness of monitoring solutions such as Nagios, MRTG, and Cacti. So collectd, the first thing that we're going to do. Now, we're going to use collectd on an Ubuntu system simply because for CentOS 6 systems, between PHP, Light HTTP, as well as Fast CGI, PHP, FPM, and the version of collectd that's available in the repositories, it's really hard and takes a really long time to get collectd and the subsequent graphical tools running. It's much easier in Ubuntu, and since this is not an exam where we're going to have to install collectd, but rather we need to be familiar with collectd, how it works, and what its configuration files and variables are, that's what we're going to do. We'll generally concentrate on CentOS 6 systems, except for where it doesn't make sense, which in this case, it's one of those for a weighted exam topic that is only of a weighting of 2. So the first thing that we need to do is let's go ahead and install collectd, which fortunately for Ubuntu, which is what we're using here, is just a matter of installing the collectd daemon itself. And there's a couple of things that we'll want to take a look at, and then we'll install some dependencies so that we can begin setting up the system statistic usage display for being able to see what we have on our system. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll install collectd. Sudo, or if we're already root like we are, we can do apt-get install collectd. Now this is just installing collectd itself. This is not installing any of the dependencies that are necessary for display. We're just installing the collectd daemon itself. But there's a whole bunch of stuff, especially on a minimal install, that collectd is going to install for us in order to complete the installation. Once that's set up, what we'll do is Ubuntu generally will start a service once it's been installed automatically. We'll go ahead and stop that service because in our future video, after we take a look at some of the configuration, then what we're going to want to do is install a number of other dependencies and do some configuration checking. So hang on just a second while I let this complete the installation, and we'll be right back. Okay, so collectd is now installed, and the primary directory that we need to be concerned about is going to be the etc collectd directory. And as you might expect, the collectd directory contains the configuration file as well as information about the collection of plugins. Now, you may be asked a couple of questions about the configuration file, mainly having to do with how plugins are managed. This is the default configuration. So plugins are managed here. First of all, we can determine our base directory, our plugin directory, and the types directory. And the types directory we'll get to in a subsequent video, but these are configuration portions of the collectd daemon that tells it information about where it can find things like how it gets CPU, how it gets memory, etc. What we want to do is we want to go down to the plugins section. And the plugins section is going to have some things uncommented for us. It's going to have anything to do with battery, CPU, DF, disk, entropy, things that are generally easy to configure. And what I mean by that is the load plugin command will tell it to go ahead and load plugins for certain types of statistics that it wants to gather. Again, CPU, processes, etc. In our case, most of the default plugins are fine and don't require any complex configuration. Some plugins do. For example, if I was going to be loading the plugin for Varnish, which is a caching mechanism for websites, I would have to come down to the plugin configuration, and there would be a section for that particular plugin that would be specific to my system and how I need to configure it to work on my system. So if I look down here and see if I can find a Varnish section, a lot of times those plugins will have something to start with, a template for you to follow. You can see RRD tool is uncommented because it's one of the plugins that we have available to us. And it's just telling it that the data directory is varlib collectd rrd. And let's see if we can find if there's a Varnish. Here it is right here. And then what we would do is we would uncomment or create a plugin Varnish instance here that tells it what to do with the collection. The instance being my instance would be the name of the Varnish collection that I have set up. Just know that there is both a plugin definition section as well as a plugin configuration section. And what determines whether a plugin is active or not is, as we looked at, if we look at load plugin and it's uncommented, the name of the plugin is what is that particular plugin and what it will gather. So in this case, we can determine that we are loading battery, CPU, DF, disk, entropy, interface, IRQ, load, memory, processes, RRD tool, swap, and users. And if I require a configuration, a plugin configuration, it's handled down here. And this is all in the etc collectd.conf file. Let's go ahead and do a service collectd stop, because in our next video, we'll start to gather the pieces that we need in order to run and display our graphical example. We'll take a look at a couple of other directories and types, and we'll take a look at the other locations and the locations for where our statistics are gathered and how to display them. So for a summary of what collectd is, how it works, and the initial configurations that you may be asked about, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.